For 60 years, Bob Dylan concealed her identity. At 83, however, he is at last speaking. In 1963, he first met her. She was the subject of his most well-known songs, and he was never the same after she left him. His closest buddies were unaware of the reality. Dylan's astounding admission clarifies everything: why he vanished during the height of his success, the motorbike accident, and the born-again era. On May 24, 1941, Bob Dylan was born in Duluth, Minnesota, as Robert Allen Zimmerman. Abram and Beatrice, his parents, belonged to a tiny Jewish community. Bob's father contracted polio when he was 6 years old. His mother had grown up in the chilly mining town of Hibbing, where the family now resides. There were many iron workers there, and the winters were bitterly cold. Bob's early ideas were influenced by the cold, the silence, and the sound of foghorns from neighboring Duluth. A quiet youngster with asthma, he was frequently absorbed in his own thoughts. His music will eventually reflect the history and adversity of his family's heritage in Lithuania and Ukraine. When Bob first heard rock and roll on the radio, everything changed. He first learned about Hank Williams and Elvis Presley when he was around 10 years old. He was struck deeply by the music. Hank's voice, he claimed, was like an electric charge. He started playing by ear at his family's piano as a result of such sensation. He was born with a gift. Sheet music wasn't necessary for him. He simply played and listened. People took notice of his unusual yet powerful chords. Bob frequently watched musical acts on screen since his family owned local movie theaters. By the age of 14, he began playing guitar and joining bands. He was enamored with Little Richard not just because of his music, but also because of his outrageous stage persona and attire. Bob aspired to emulate him. Bob was completely engrossed with music by high school. He formed the Golden Chords, a band that performed fast-paced, loud rock and roll. They played so loudly during a school talent event that the principal reportedly turned off the microphone. Even though several bandmates subsequently claimed that it didn't happen precisely like way, the incident became part of Dylan mythology. Nevertheless, Bob's boisterous, defiant energy made an impression. He also stated in his high school yearbook that he wanted to be like Little Richard. He was serious. Bob had an odd tendency even in those days. He invented stories about himself. He revealed to his students that he was a New Mexico orphan. He enjoyed making up stories, even if none of it was real. The falsehoods increased after he relocated to Minneapolis in 1959. He told a variety of fictitious stories. He made a joke about losing his true love and turning into an alcoholic during one interview, acquiring TB while working as a Chinaman. Even though it was all gibberish, he included it in his performance. He even went by fictitious aliases, such as Elston Gunn. Bob was developing a persona in addition to performing songs. He had witnessed wrestlers and musicians doing it. He realized that having a tale, even if it wasn't true, was a must for performing. Bob started attending the University of Minnesota that same year, but he had little interest in education. He took up residence in Dinkytown, a neighborhood populated with political outcasts, poets and students, in a modest flat above a pharmacy. He finally discovered what he was searching for there. He performed for only a few bucks every night in neighborhood coffee shops, and he was occasionally dismissed for demanding more. He originally identified himself as Bob Dylan in one of those little settings. The origin of the name is unknown. Some claim that Dylan Thomas, a poet, served as its inspiration. Some claim it came from a TV show's cowboy. In any case, the moniker stayed. Bob was given a copy of Woody Guthrie's autobiography, Bound for Glory, in Dinkytown. Everything changed because of that book. Bob switched from playing an electric guitar to an acoustic. He began penning songs that sounded less rock and roll, and more protest and folk. He finished college at the end of 1960. He packed up and permanently left Minnesota, with a guitar, a bag and a dream. 19-year-old Bob Dylan got off a bus in New York City in the bitter cold of January 1961. There was only one reason he had recently traveled from Minnesota for over 24 hours straight through the harsh winter weather. Woody Guthrie was someone he wished to meet. Ever since Dylan read Bound for Glory, the book about a young man searching for purpose in music, Guthrie had been his idol. Guthrie was now ill, suffering from Huntington's illness, and residing at a mental health facility in New Jersey. Dylan nevertheless traveled, and somehow, he was able to perform for the guy who influenced his musical vision even in that silent hospital room. Guthrie, who could hardly talk, gave Dylan a letter that said, "I'm not dead yet." It was a memorable moment. Dylan penned Song to Woody after returning home. On his debut album, it was one of just 2 original tracks. Because that's what folk singers did, he wrote it using Guthrie's tune from the massacre of 1913. They inherited stuff. The first genuine shot Dylan received came a few months later. John Hammond of Columbia Records recognized something in him that others did not. Dylan was viewed as a mistake by the majority at the label. They referred to him as Hammond's foolishness. However, Hammond had already discovered stars. He wasn't going to back down now, and neither were Billie Holiday or Aretha Franklin. In October 1961, he signed Dylan to Columbia. Dylan didn't require or have a lawyer. "I would have signed anything," he replied. With only $402 spent over 3 afternoons, the recording sessions were quick and inexpensive. However, it wasn't simple. Dylan loathed taking second takes, hissed every S, popped every P, and couldn't remain on the microphone. He warned them, "I can't sing the same song twice in a row." His debut record suffered as a result of his intransigence. It in its first year sold just 5,000 copies. However, Hammond had faith, and he was correct, since those 5,000 copies were only the start. Dylan met the person who would transform his life around the same period. Suze wrote a greeting. She was youthful, intelligent, attractive, and very political. Both of her parents had been Communist Party members. She was exposed to activism and protest as a child. Her vitality instantly drew Dylan in, and they moved in together in early 1962. His world was opened by Suze. She exposed him to avant-garde theater, poetry, foreign films, and most importantly, politics. He began to look beyond songs with her. A sense of purpose began to dawn on him. That influence gave rise to songs like The Death of Emmett Till and Masters of War. So did the two of them strolling hand in hand on the cover of Bob Dylan's Freewheel, one of his most famous pictures. Although they appeared to be any young couple in love, they were under increasing pressure on the inside. Dylan was becoming well known. They had different personalities. It was over in 1964. His voice was shaped by love, yet it was unable to withstand the tempest it contributed to. However, Greenwich Village remained intact. It was now the hub of the world of folk music. Coffee shops were filled with voices and instruments every night. Dylan performed at all the important venues, including the Bitter End Café Wa and Gerda's Folk City. Although the living was difficult, small chilly quarters, cheap food and borrowed sweaters, it was magical. You could hear the future in every doorway as you strolled along MacDougal Street. Performers competed, worked together, observed, and learnt from one another. Dylan became sharper, quicker, and more daring as a result of that pressure. He became weirder as a result. Dylan began creating his own mythology. He told outrageous and wholly false stories in interviews. He once told Playboy that after losing his one true love, playing cards, turning into a Chinaman in Phoenix, and waking up in a pool club, he began singing rock and roll. He said he used to work as a model for Charles Atlas and lived with a 13-year-old girl. Dylan said, "No, that's how I got tuberculosis," when the reporter questioned if all of that resulted in rock music. Everything sounded correct, yet none of it was true. He had no desire to be Minnesota's Robert Zimmerman. Whoever Bob Dylan was, he aspired to be him. So he guessed as he went along. His music became crisper, even as the story became more bizarre. He penned The Death of Emmett Till in 1962, The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, a song that struck listeners with its serene, harsh reality, was released the next year. The wealthy white guy who killed Patty, a black lady, was sentenced to 6 months in prison. Dylan did more than only blame. He related the entire tale. The system, the people, and the quiet. It was no longer only a protest. It was a work of poetry. The world began to take attention by the summer of 1963. Dylan performed at the largest folk music event, the Newport Folk Festival. He was only 22, however the crowd was already familiar with his name. Wearing a worn army shirt, he joined Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, and the Freedom Singers on stage and sang while blowing in the wind. "We Shall Overcome" followed. The audience sensed it. It was dubbed the festival's most impactful moment by Billboard magazine. It was visible to everybody. Dylan wasn't only a participant in the scene anymore. It was under his leadership. That ascent included his association with Joan Baez. Even though she was already well known when they first met, she supported him, took him on stage, sang his songs, and helped him go to the top. They were companions by 1963, both on and off stage. Prior to Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" address, they sang a song together during the March on Washington. But there is a cost to fame. Dylan took Baez along on his 1965 UK tour, but he forbade her from performing. She experienced heartbreak and abandonment. It ended a few months later when he wed someone else. Baez would compose songs, particularly Diamonds and Rust, about the suffering. The Times They Are a-Changin' followed. Just the title sent a message. When it was released in 1964, the nation was shocked. The Vietnam War was imminent, civil rights demonstrations were growing, and JFK had just been assassinated. Dylan was an experienced individual. It was written as an anthem by him. "Congressmen and senators, please answer the call." Once, a buddy said, "What is this shit?" Dylan gave a shrug. "People want to hear that." It was successful. The music transcended oceans and generations. In Britain, it peaked at number 9. Critics referred to it as timeless. Every generation who heard the lyrics discovered new meanings as the years went by. Dylan began to change once again in the same year, from the inside out this time. After taking LSD, he began reading Rambo. His songs become fantastical. He didn't want to blame anyone anymore. His goal was to use words to create images. He created Chimes of Freedom, a song that didn't follow a straight line. While on a road trip in early 1964, it simply happened. One night in June, he drank wine and spent 3 hours recording 14 tracks. That turned out to be another aspect of Bob Dylan, and an obvious indication that his protest days were coming to an end. What followed would permanently alter rock music. Bob Dylan rocked the music industry in 1965, bringing it all back home, which he released, wasn't your typical folk CD. Electric instruments, guitars, drums, and a complete band filled the first half. After just a few seconds of the deep, lonely blues that opened, you could tell that things had shifted. Fans of folk music were perplexed. This was the man who used to sing with just a harmonica and an acoustic guitar. Dylan understood precisely what he was doing, even if he was now tearing into electric rock. The lyrics had become darker, sharper, and weirder, yet the album's second half remained acoustic. He seemed to be displaying two sides of himself to everyone. One foot is already running toward the future, while the other is in the past. And the last song, Baby Blue, "It's All Over Now," felt like a farewell, maybe to the entire folk scene that had attempted to keep him back as well as to a girlfriend. Then followed the 6-minute song Like a Rolling Stone. For a single person, that was unprecedented. Record execs detested it. The radio stations refused to play it. It was too rough and too lengthy. However, an odd event occurred. One night a copy of the song was played in a club in New York. The crowd went crazy. Until the album was exhausted, they pleaded with the DJ to play it repeatedly. Radio stations called the following morning, pleading for copies. People didn't care that DJs had to turn the record over halfway through in order to play the entire record. The lyrics are powerful. Behind Dylan's voice, the organ groaned, and it felt positively infinite. It seemed like it might go on forever, according to Paul McCartney. After hearing it, Frank Zappa even made a joke about wanting to give up music. It had that kind of strength. Dylan took the stage at the Newport Folk Festival a few days later. He had an attitude, black leather, and boots. People assumed he would strum some soft tunes. Rather, he connected. The crowd erupted as he tore into Maggie's farm, accompanied by an organ and electric guitar. While some booed, others cheered. People were in tears. Pete Seeger allegedly shouted that he intended to use an axe to sever the electrical wires. Dylan's electrifying performance in front of a sea of bewildered and enraged folk fans became legendary. He left the stage after only 3 songs. He returned by himself and performed 2 acoustic songs as though to soothe the fury. However, the harm, or perhaps the development, was already done. It would be another 37 years before he returned to Newport. The eerie sound of the organ that yielded like a rolling stone nearly didn't occur. Al Cooper, a guitarist who is 21 years old, was just present to observe the recording session. However, Cooper silently moved behind the organ, an instrument he was not even proficient in playing, as soon as the producer left the room. Fortunately, it was turned on already. He remained silent when he wasn't certain of the chords and only played when he was. The sounds had a strange, lovely pause as a result of that hesitation. The producer chuckled when he came back and saw Cooper playing the organ. Dylan, however, was pleased with what he heard, and instructed them to include the organ more. Cooper's contribution remained in the finished draft. Suddenly, an unintentional organ line became famous. The most spectacular incident occurred in Manchester, England in 1966. Dylan split each concert in half while he was on tour, first acoustic, then electric. The first half was adored by folk enthusiasts. The second followed. Dylan threw himself into electrified tunes with his band in tow. After one, a single word, Judas, was yelled by someone in the throng. It was cruel, a full-fledged charge. Dylan did not recoil. Leaning toward the microphone, he retaliated. "You don't have my faith. You are dishonest." Then he snapped, "Play it fucking loud," turning to face the band. And they did. Thunderously rumbled through the hall like a rolling stone. That night, nobody forgot. People searched for the person who had yelled the slur for decades. It was claimed by 2 men, but nobody could ever be certain. Dylan married in secret that same year. He married Sarah Lones in Long Island under an oak tree while taking a vacation from traveling. The majority of his pals were unaware of it because it was so secret. Dylan wanted the occasion to be theirs alone because Sarah was expecting. He denied it when questioned about it. The story wasn't reported in a newspaper until several months later. They had a complex connection. Sarah had been a secretary and a model. When she first met Dylan, he was still associated with Suze Rotolo and Joan Baez. Even though he first kept it a secret, Sarah was the person he married. Dylan was also working on Blonde, a double album that would go on to become one of his best-known works at this time. He desired a sound that he characterized as wild, thin Mercury. The New York sessions didn't go well. He then traveled to Nashville. He spent a few hectic days recording the majority of the album there with excellent session musicians. With the help of caffeine, adrenaline, and most likely more, they worked through the night. Dylan once began playing a brand new tune that had the sound of a marching band performing when intoxicated. It sounded like the Salvation Army. The producer laughed. They got one when Dylan asked if they could. Rainy Day Women, numbers 12 and 35. The album's opener came to life in this way. However, there was a price for all of this achievement. The global tour in 1966 was harsh. Dylan would start each evening with a solo performance before returning with his band for the electrifying set. Additionally, bands would boo, kiss, and leave each night. The scene was the same in city after city. Electric indignation, acoustic cheers. He was worn out. Later, Robbie Robertson remarked that Dylan appeared to be collapsing. He nearly drowned in a motel bathtub one night. Dylan was high on fumes and narcotics. He was hardly able to talk on stage after the last performance in London. Then there was the accident. Dylan crashed on his motorcycle close to Woodstock on July 29, 1966. The specifics are still unclear. No ambulance was present. No report from the hospital. It wasn't as bad as it appeared, according to some. Others think it was covert but severe. Dylan subsequently said that the accident was a means of escaping the attention, the stress, and maybe the drugs. he vanished from the public view for a considerable amount of time, regardless of the facts. Dylan sought solace at Woodstock throughout the next months. He stayed with his family, cut wood, took his dog on walks in the woods, and worked with the Hawks to make music in the basement of a pink home. Big Pink, the name of that home, gave rise to an entirely new sound. Dylan prioritized starting a family after being married to Sarah Lowndes in 1965. In a few years he and her had 4 more children together after he adopted her daughter Maria. The dad, who appeared to be on the verge of burning out, was suddenly escorting his daughter to school bus and peacefully writing or painting in the afternoons. Dylan's helper reportedly said that he had never seen a more devoted family guy. In 1969, Dylan performed his first complete performance in years in front of 150,000 fans. Among the audience were the Beatles. Jane Fonda and Elton John were too. The show almost didn't happen. During their journey, his son Jesse suffered injuries and required hospitalization. At the last minute, Dylan had to fly in. Nevertheless, he shocked many with a gentler country-inspired sound while performing in a pale white suit. Dylan was doing more than simply singing that evening. He was demonstrating his transformation to the world. Even his most devoted followers were taken aback by what transpired next. He put out an album titled Self-Portrait in 1970, and it left almost everyone perplexed. Critics ripped it apart because the cover looked hurried and the music sounded sloppy. The famous first line of one review was, "What is this shit?" Dylan acknowledged years later that it wasn't an accident. The purpose of the record was to alienate people. He had had enough of being seen as a prophet and adored. He therefore gave them what they were unable to adore. It didn't work out. Still, the record became a gold standard. Some even began referring to it as misinterpreted over time, which was a precursor to Dylan's constant one step ahead of the competition. He rejoined the band 3 years later to record a new album titled Planet Waves. Fast-paced, laser-focused sessions produced Dylan's first #1 record. The tour followed. It was enormous. Tickets were sought for by millions, although a small percentage were able to. At the time, it became the highest-grossing tour in history. Behind the scenes, however, the strain was mounting. The band was disintegrating. Dylan's marriage was also in disarray. He subsequently stated that the start of painting courses in 1974 was the turning point in his life. Something changed inside him. Sarah was never able to comprehend him after that. His subsequent record was the result of that emotional breakdown. The 1975 single Blood on the Tracks seemed like Dylan exposing a wound. The anguish in the lyrics suggested a different tale, even if he maintained it was about his marriage. Jacob, his son, would subsequently state that the record was unquestionably about his parents. Dylan acknowledged that it contained some truth. The songs were intensely personal, unvarnished and harsh. After his brother gave the initial version of the album a mediocre evaluation, he even re-recorded half of it. One of the most impactful breakup records in music history was the result. Then came his most outrageous tour to date. The Revue of Rolling Thunder was more than a tour. It was a touring production with rock musicians, playwrights, and poets. Dylan encouraged random people to join him on stage while sporting white face paint. It was impromptu and crazy. Additionally, he was pursuing something greater than music, which was entirely different from anything fans had ever witnessed. Something personal, significant, and dramatic. Dylan was still attempting to maintain his marriage at the heart of it all. In 1975, Sarah arrived at the studio one evening. Dylan spotted an opportunity even though they hadn't been doing well. "This one's for you," he added, turning to Sarah after instructing the band to perform. Then, with her standing directly across the glass, he sang a song about their life together called Sarah. There was silence in the room. It was uncooked. It was authentic. And it did work for a while. For a short time, they reunited. Sarah even went on the tour and made an appearance in Ronaldo and Clara, Dylan's oddball movie. However, the fissures were too deep. In 1977, everything fell apart permanently. One morning, Sarah saw another lady sitting with Bob and the children in their home when she walked downstairs. Then there was a yelling match. "He struck her," she said. According to court filings, there was panic and unpredictable conduct. Dylan was unable to refute the harm, but he denied the abuse. They fought over memories, money, and custody. The rights to several of the songs Dylan had composed during their marriage were among the half of everything she took with her. She never talked about their life together, which was part of the agreement, and she hasn't. Dylan acknowledged that he wasn't a decent husband years later. It didn't last as long as he had hoped. Rather, he left behind music that was honest and infused with sadness, songs that, despite his best efforts to conceal it, spoke the truth. Someone tossed a little silver cross onto the stage at a San Diego performance in 1978. Dylan took it up. He claimed to have sensed Jesus physically touch him the next evening in a solitary Tucson hotel room. His entire body shook. He was transformed by that moment. He converted to Christianity. He soon underwent baptism, enrolled in Bible study courses, and put out a gospel-heavy record. He traveled with a set selection that focused entirely on faith and ceased performing his previous protest songs. The fans were perplexed. The criticism was severe. Dylan didn't care though. Not yet anyhow. The pushback was swift. When they learned what they had committed to, some concert-goers tore up their tickets and left. Others were pleading outside of venues to sell their $15 tickets for only $5. Dylan would quote scripture and preach about the end times in between songs. He announced the return of Jesus to the world. He issued a Middle East war warning. He was no longer only a vocalist. His transformation into a street preacher with a guitar alienated a large portion of his fan base. Dylan started to change once again in 1983. With his album Infidels, he returned to more familiar territory. Though it also focused on politics and personal uncertainty, it nevertheless had some religious undertones. After rejecting other well-known artists like David Bowie and Frank Zappa, he collaborated with Mark Knopfler of Dire Straits. The recording sessions were tumultuous, nonetheless, since Dylan is Dylan. To make things interesting, he once experimented with turning the tin foil from his sandwich into a microphone. Additionally, he recorded other amazing songs, such as Blind Willie McTell, but left them off the CD. It performed nicely though. It was a top 10 success in Norway and the UK and gold in the US. Slowly, he returned. Dylan led a covert existence behind the scenes. He and Carolyn Dennis, one of his backing vocalists, had a daughter in 1986. No one knew they were married in Los Angeles. Not the fans, not the media, and not even the majority of his pals. They struck everything, utilizing a legislation that let them to affix their marriage license. Dylan was not even named as the father on the birth certificate. The world didn't know until 2001, when a biography was published. According to Carolyn, they took this action to safeguard their daughter's childhood. Despite their 1992 divorce, they remained hidden until the very end. His profession reached its lowest point, but his private life remained secret. Knocked Out Loaded, his 1986 album, was hurried and hardly cohesive. It was ripped up by critics. According to Rolling Stone, it was gloomy. Dylan acknowledged that he didn't work very hard at it. In 1988, things didn't get any better with Down in the Groove. It was eventually dubbed his worst album ever, and did not sell well. The cover was disappointing as well. The label rejected the first idea, which was to depict a man playing a guitar and riding a horse backwards. That encapsulated the entire time, bewildered, off course, and filled with lost opportunities. Dylan appeared to be fading out, but then something unexpected happened. He recorded a little song in 1988 with George Harrison, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne. The Traveling Wilburys became a supergroup as a result of that session. They all adopted silly identities and played as if they were enjoying themselves and weren't attempting to become legendary. It was successful. They produced a successful record. It was a Grammy winner. And it had much greater significance for Dylan. It proved that he still possessed it. He still had the ability to produce something amazing. He wasn't finished yet, either.